The whispers always began the same way. No black maid had ever lasted in the Bradford mansion, not one. Some said the house itself was cursed, that its gleaming marble floors and towering palm-lined drive swallowed women whole and spat them out broken. Others claimed it wasn't the house at all, but the woman who ruled it. Either way, the legend hung over Beverly Hills like a shadow no sunlight could burn away. The mansion looked perfect from the outside, almost unreal in its grandeur. The wrought iron gates stood taller than most men, black and sharp against the soft gold glow of California mornings. Beyond them, a driveway paved with smooth, spotless stones stretched toward a pristine white structure, so flawless it resembled a palace. Palm trees swayed gently, their green crowns brushing against the blue sky, as if bowing to welcome the rich and the powerful. To outsiders, it was paradise, but the ones who had walked those halls knew the truth. Behind those perfect walls was a battlefield, and at the heart of it lived Meline Bradford. She was young, too young, some whispered, to be the wife of James Bradford, one of the wealthiest men in the state. At only 32, Meline had secured her place in his empire of glass towers and luxury estates, her beauty as sharp and polished as the diamonds she wore to breakfast. Tall, slender, golden-haired, she carried herself like royalty. Her icy blue eyes moved over people the way one might glance at insects, cold, detached, and faintly amused. Every silk gown she wore, every flick of her manicured fingers, was a reminder that she was untouchable. But beauty alone did not define her. Meline was feared, more than adored, for the cruelty she dispensed like perfume. A word from her lips could sting deeper than any slap, though she was no stranger to those either. Staff whispered that she struck without warning, an open hand across. A maid's cheek for dust left on a vase, a shove for setting the wrong temperature of water. But the sharpest wounds came from her words. Her disdain was always sharpened against the same stone, race. To Meline, every black woman who worked under her was beneath her, unworthy of even sharing the air she breathed. Her insults were not just casual cruelty, but deliberate, vicious reminders of power and hierarchy. 9 maids had come and gone since she married James. 9 women who had tried to endure the humiliation, only to break under the venom of her tongue and the sting of her hand. Some left in the night, clutching their meager belongings, too ashamed to face another sunrise in that house. Others fled barefoot through the gardens, leaving behind shoes, pride, and hope. By the time they reached the city, they carried nothing but the scars of words that burned long after they were spoken. And yet, on this quiet morning, as golden light washed over the mansion's marble face, a new figure stood at the gates. Her name was Jasmine Carter. She was not dressed in silks, nor did diamonds sparkle from her hands. A simple dress clung to her frame, worn but neat. Over her shoulder hung a small fabric bag that carried all she owned, 2 changes of clothes and a folded photograph of her daughter, Isla. Isla was 8 years old, lying in a hospital bed miles away, her small body weakened by a heart condition that threatened to steal the childhood she had never truly lived. Doctors spoke in numbers, charts, and bills that reached into the tens of thousands, numbers Jasmine could never dream of touching. She had begged, she had prayed, but miracles had been scarce. Now, standing before the mansion gates, she knew she had only one chance left: 3 months. If she could endure for just 3 months, she could save enough to give Isla a chance at life. Her hands trembled as she pressed the intercom, but her eyes, deep brown and steady, revealed something different. Not fear, not surrender, but resolve. Jasmine knew the stories, every one of them. She had heard the warnings, the cruel laughter of women who said, "Don't even try, girl, you won't last a week." But Jasmine wasn't here to run. She wasn't here to prove anything to the world. She was here to fight for her daughter, for love, for survival. Inside the house, somewhere past the gleaming marble floors and velvet drapes, Meline Bradford was likely sipping her morning tea, already thinking of new ways to remind the world who held power within those walls. Jasmine didn't know what awaited her. She only knew that she could not fail. And so the gates opened with a slow groan, and Jasmine stepped forward, her heart pounding, her mind repeating the only promise that mattered. 3 months. Just 3 months. The question that hung in the air, silent but sharp as glass, was simple. Could this young black woman endure where 9 others had failed? Could she survive the impossible? The mansion loomed closer, its windows glinting in the morning light like unblinking eyes, and Jasmine felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Somewhere inside, a storm was waiting, and she was about to walk straight into its heart. The marble floor gleamed so brightly that Jasmine could see her reflection staring back at her. She was kneeling, cloth in hand, polishing with slow, careful strokes. The silence of the grand living room pressed down on her, broken only by the faint ticking of a distant clock. She had been given no instructions, no welcome, not even a glance of kindness. Just one sharp order from the head housekeeper: "Clean the floor, madam will be down shortly." It was a test, Jasmine knew, not of skill, but of endurance. The mansion had a way of watching, of making her feel small. Even now, she could sense eyes on her. From the kitchen doorway, Nancy the cook leaned with her arms crossed, whispering something to the chauffeur, Ben. Their voices were too low to make out, but their smirks were clear enough. Jasmine kept her head bowed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her strokes across the marble remained steady. She wasn't here to win approval. She was here to last. The sharp rhythm of heels clicking against polished steps suddenly broke the air. Jasmine froze for half a second before forcing herself to keep scrubbing. Each step drew closer, deliberate and heavy with power. When Jasmine finally lifted her gaze, she saw her, the mistress of the house. Meline Bradford descended the staircase like a queen arriving to court. Her silk dress shimmered in shades of deep crimson, hugging her frame as though it had been poured onto her. Golden hair swept into a flawless knot gleamed under the morning light. In one hand, she carried a delicate porcelain teacup, the kind you'd expect to see in a museum, not a kitchen. Her icy blue eyes landed on Jasmine, studying her with the same curiosity one might show a stray dog that had wandered into the dining room. "The new maid?" she asked softly, her tone wrapped in silk but edged with glass. Jasmine placed the cloth neatly on her lap and bowed her head. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Jasmine." Meline didn't respond. She moved slowly, almost gracefully, across the floor. Her gaze swept over the spotless marble Jasmine had just cleaned. For a brief, dangerous moment, Jasmine thought she might have done well enough to avoid humiliation. But then Meline tilted her wrist ever so slightly, and the teacup tipped. Brown liquid splashed across the white marble, staining it in jagged patches. The sound of liquid hitting stone was small, but in the silence it was deafening. Jasmine's eyes widened. She looked up, startled, but Meline only raised her brows and let a faint smirk curl across her lips. "This floor," she said, voice soft, "was perfectly clean before you touched it." The words landed like a blade, cutting deeper than their calmness suggested. From the kitchen doorway came a faint chuckle. Jasmine's cheeks burned, but she dropped to her knees without hesitation, dabbing the mess with her cloth. She said nothing, because what was there to say? "Clumsy," Meline added, her tone carrying just enough volume for the others to hear. "Lazy. I'll never understand why they keep sending me people like you." Jasmine's throat tightened. She heard the whispers, little sparks of amusement from the staff who lingered to watch. They weren't cruel in the way Meline was. They were spectators, relieved it wasn't them in the line of fire. Jasmine pressed the cloth firmly against the marble, working until not a drop remained. When she finally sat back, her hands raw from the scrubbing, she kept her eyes down. She refused to give Meline the satisfaction of seeing tears. Instead, she whispered to herself so softly no one else could hear, 3 months, just 3 months. Meline lingered, her expressions unreadable. She had expected protest, maybe even tears, but Jasmine's silence unnerved her. The lack of reaction was, in its own way, a form of resistance. With a sharp turn of her heel, Meline walked away, her perfume trailing behind her like a reminder of her presence. The moment she disappeared, the whispers started again. Ben shook his head, muttering, "She won't last." Nancy gave a small, knowing smirk. Margaret, the strict housekeeper who had hired Jasmine, passed through without a word, though her cold gaze lingered longer than usual. Jasmine rose slowly, cloth still in hand. Her palms stung, her pride ached, but her eyes remained steady. She walked back toward her small quarters at the edge of the mansion, every step heavy with the weight of humiliation. Yet deep inside, she carried a spark. She had survived the first test, and though no maid had ever lasted in the Bradford mansion, Jasmine Carter whispered a silent promise to the daughter waiting for her in a hospital bed. "I will not fail you. I will endure where others could not." The war inside the mansion had begun. The morning sun streamed through the tall glass windows, filling the Bradford mansion with a soft golden glow. To most, it would have felt like warmth, but to Jasmine it was the glare of a spotlight. Every move she made seemed to echo in the silence, as though the house itself were waiting for her to stumble. Her knees still ached from scrubbing the marble the day before, yet she rose before dawn, determined to start again. She polished every corner, wiped every surface, scrubbed until her thin hands were red and sore. If there was dust, it would not be found by Meline's sharp eyes. But Jasmine knew better. In this house, perfection was not protection. It was simply an invitation for the next trap. By mid-morning, she stepped into the kitchen, her hair tied back neatly, her uniform freshly washed. Margaret, the strict housekeeper, barely glanced at her. She only jerked her chin toward a silver tray on the counter. "Madam wants her lemon water. 3 slices, room temperature, no seeds." Her voice was flat, almost bored, but Jasmine sensed the weight of warning beneath the words. She chose the freshest lemons, cut each slice with care, and lifted out every tiny seed with the tip of a spoon. Her hands were steady. When she placed the glass on the tray, she caught Nancy, the cook, watching her with thinly veiled curiosity. For just a moment, Jasmine thought she saw surprise in the woman's eyes, as though she hadn't expected the new maid to succeed in such a deceptively simple task. Carrying the tray carefully, Jasmine walked the long hall to Meline's bedroom. She knocked softly and entered at the sound of a faint, "Come in." The mistress of the house sat on a velvet chaise, her silk robe draped like a painting across her frame. She didn't look at Jasmine, didn't even acknowledge her, just took the glass and sipped. A moment later, her nose wrinkled. She set the glass down with a sharp click. "Too cold," she said sweetly, the edge of malice hidden under the sugar of her voice. "Did I not make myself clear?" "I'm very sorry, ma'am. I'll remake it right away." Jasmine bowed her head and reached for the glass, but she never touched it. With a flick of her wrist, Meline tipped the glass onto the floor. It shattered, lemon water spreading across the carpet, shards glinting dangerously in the sunlight. Jasmine felt the sting of glass against her fingertips as she crouched to gather the pieces. "Clean it up," Meline said, her tone almost satisfied. "I don't want to step on your carelessness." Jasmine worked quickly, silently, her throat tight. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She gathered every shard, dabbed up every drop, until the floor was spotless again. Meline watched her the entire time. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with triumph, but with something unexpected, irritation. She had seen maids crumble, sob, even beg before, but this one did not. This one simply endured. The days that followed were no different. Jasmine scrubbed until her hands bled, polished until her back ached. But no matter how perfect the work, Meline always found fault. One afternoon, as Jasmine polished a crystal statue in the living room, Meline paused nearby. Her voice rose, sharp and loud enough for every staff member to hear. "Are you sure your hands are clean enough to touch that? I've heard people like you aren't very clean. I'd hate for my valuables to be soiled." Soft chuckles rippled through the room. Jasmine's face burned, but she kept her eyes on the glass, polishing as though she hadn't heard. Meline leaned closer, her voice dropping into a whisper only Jasmine could hear. "I won't stop until you leave this house." For a moment, Jasmine's chest tightened. The words pierced her like a needle. But when she looked up, her eyes were steady, her voice calm. "I'll do my best, ma'am." The answer startled Meline. She had expected tears, anger, anything but composure. For a heartbeat, her mask cracked, but she quickly recovered. "Good," she said coldly, "because I've only just begun." Her heels clicked against the marble as she walked away, the sound echoing like the closing of a cell door. Jasmine stood still, her cloth still pressed against the glass. She drew a deep breath, whispering silently to herself, 3 months, Isla. Just 3 months. The words were not just a promise, they were armor. What Jasmine didn't realize was that she was no longer fighting only for herself. Her quiet strength, her refusal to bend, was already unsettling the household. The other staff watched her with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. And from the shadows of his study, James Bradford had begun watching too, his sharp eyes catching moments he could no longer ignore. The silent war inside the mansion was escalating, and Jasmine Carter was the first to fight it not with rage, but with unshakable dignity. Late afternoon light stretched long shadows across the Bradford estate, painting the marble halls in shades of gold and gray. James Bradford walked slowly down the corridor, his suit jacket loosened, his tie slightly undone from a long day of business meetings. He rarely spent more than a few moments in his own home during daylight hours. His life was a calendar of contracts, phone calls, and skyscraper negotiations. The house, in his mind, existed only as a backdrop, pristine, perfect, a place that required no thought as long as it ran smoothly. But today, as he returned earlier than usual, he caught the sound of his wife's voice. It was sharp, colder than usual, slicing through the closed door of the master bedroom. "Do you know how much this is worth?" James slowed, frowning. The tone wasn't one of annoyance, it was fury, icy, trembling at the edge of control. Against his better judgment, he stopped just outside the door, leaning slightly toward the narrow opening. Inside, Jasmine stood with her head bowed, her hands trembling as they cradled a delicate perfume bottle. "Baccarat crystal," James noted instantly. He remembered the exact day he bought it, an anniversary gift Meline had demanded with subtle hints until he gave in. Expensive, fragile, but replaceable. Certainly not worth the venom in his wife's voice. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," Jasmine whispered. Her voice was soft, steady despite the fear written in her shaking fingers. "I'll be more careful." She tried to set the bottle gently back on the vanity, but before she could, Meline's hand snapped out and struck her across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed in the room, echoing down the hall like a gunshot. James froze. He had known Meline to be demanding, even cutting with staff, but this was something else. His eyes locked on Jasmine. She didn't scream, she didn't defend herself. She placed the bottle down carefully, bowed her head lower, and whispered again, "I understand, ma'am. I'll do better." Her voice was not broken. It was calm, almost frighteningly calm, the kind of composure that seemed to hold back an ocean of pain. James felt something stir in him, a discomfort he hadn't expected. Meline turned, her face twisted in frustration, and nearly collided with him at the doorway. For an instant, surprise flickered across her icy features before she smoothed it away with the skill of a practiced actress. "James?" she said quickly, her tone bright and falsely warm. "You're home early." He stepped inside, his eyes flicking from Jasmine's trembling hands to the faint red mark already forming on her cheek. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Nothing," Meline said too quickly. "The maid was careless. She nearly dropped my perfume." James's gaze lingered on her, then slid back to Jasmine, who was already retreating toward the door, her head low, her lips pressed tight. She didn't protest. She didn't plead her case. She simply left the room with silent dignity. Something in that silence unsettled him. He turned back to his wife. "I think she understands her mistake," he said slowly. "You don't have to be so harsh." For the first time in their marriage, Meline faltered. Her eyes widened slightly, as though she hadn't expected him to contradict her. Then she straightened, her chin tilting up. "You don't understand, James. People like her." She stopped herself, but it was too late. "People like her?" he repeated, his voice tightening. His eyes narrowed with a sharpness that made her flinch. "I mean the staff," she corrected quickly. "They need strict discipline. Otherwise, they get lazy. It's the only way to manage them." But James wasn't convinced. For the first time, he saw something beneath her polished surface that unsettled him deeply, a coldness he could no longer excuse as exacting standards. He said nothing more. He turned away, but his mind churned with unease. Down the hall, he caught a glimpse of Jasmine disappearing into the servants' wing, her shoulders straight despite the sting of humiliation. That image lingered long after Meline's voice faded into silence. Alone later in his study, James sat by the window, staring out at the fading light. He tried to bury himself in paperwork, but the image of Jasmine's quiet endurance refused to leave him. She was poor, vulnerable, treated as less than human in his own house, yet she carried herself with more dignity than half the executives he dealt with daily. And Meline, the woman he had once believed to be misunderstood, delicate, needing protection, had revealed a cruelty that shook him. For the first time, James Bradford felt something dangerous settle in his chest. Doubt. And with that doubt came a decision. From this moment forward, he would watch his wife, watch the staff, watch the maid who refused to break. Perhaps then, he would uncover the truth about his own home. The Bradford mansion had always been filled with whispers. Now, James intended to listen. The mansion had always been a place of whispers, servants speaking in hushed tones behind closed doors, rumors slipping through marble hallways like smoke. But after that day, after James Bradford himself had witnessed the slap and spoken words of quiet disapproval, the whispers took on a different tone. Something had shifted in the house, though no one would admit it out loud. Jasmine felt it first in the eyes that followed her. For weeks, every glance had been laced with mockery, pity, or cold dismissal. Nancy the cook had smirked when Meline humiliated her. Ben, the chauffeur, had wagered silently in his mind how long she would last. Margaret, the head housekeeper, had carried a gaze so sharp it seemed to slice Jasmine in half. But now their eyes lingered differently. Margaret passed her in the corridor one morning, arms full of linens. For the first time, her stare didn't cut. Instead, it paused, softened, just slightly, but enough that Jasmine felt it. Nancy no longer smirked when Meline's voice lashed across the room. Instead, she turned her head quickly, as if ashamed to be caught watching. Even Ben, leaning against the polished black Mercedes in the drive, gave Jasmine a look that was no longer mocking, but quietly curious. They had all seen the slap. They had all seen Jasmine's silence, and they had all seen her endure where others had run. Without meaning to, Jasmine had unsettled them all. But no one was more unsettled than Meline. Her control of the household had always been absolute. The staff feared her. Their silence was her crown. But now when she spoke, she felt something slipping. It wasn't rebellion, not openly. It was subtler. A hesitation in the way Margaret obeyed, a faint stiffness in Nancy's replies, the chauffeur's eyes lingering on Jasmine just a moment too long. Respect was a fragile thing, and Meline felt it cracking like glass underfoot. And at the center of it was the maid who would not break. That evening, Meline orchestrated another test. She waited until James was home, until the dining room was glowing with crystal chandeliers and the table was laid with silver cutlery and imported wine. Jasmine served the meal quietly, moving with careful grace, her eyes lowered but her back straight. When Meline reached for her glass, her hand slipped, deliberately, and red wine spilled across the white Persian rug in a violent splash of crimson. The gasps from the staff were immediate, their eyes darting to Jasmine. "Why would you place the wine glass there?" Meline demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. "Do you not have eyes? Are you trying to ruin my home?" Every gaze shifted to Jasmine. Even James looked at her, curious, expectant. This was the moment. This was when the new maid would crack, protest, maybe cry. But Jasmine only bent to her knees, blotting the spreading stain with calm precision. Her voice was steady, her tone devoid of defiance or fear. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I'll be more careful." No tremor, no tears. James's fork stilled halfway to his mouth. He studied her, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was something in her stillness that unsettled him deeply, something he couldn't name. Meline too felt it, though in her it sparked fury. She wanted Jasmine's dignity to break, to shatter as easily as the crystal vase she planned to drop the following afternoon. But Jasmine didn't shatter. The next day, when the priceless antique vase slipped from Meline's fingers and shattered into glittering shards across the marble floor, the household gasped again. Meline's voice rang sharp. "You clumsy girl! Do you even know what that was worth? You're a disgrace!" Jasmine knelt, gathering the shards with trembling hands, each sliver biting into her skin. Her face was pale, but her eyes remained calm. "I apologize for my carelessness, ma'am." The words cut Meline in ways no outburst ever could. Because it wasn't defeat in Jasmine's voice. It was something far more dangerous, resilience. From the doorway, Margaret's lips pressed tight, hiding a flicker of respect. Nancy, arms folded, looked away, unable to hide the shame in her eyes. And James stood silent just inside his study, watching with fists clenched, watching his wife's cruelty and the maid's strength in equal measure. That night, as Jasmine lay on the narrow bed in her small quarters, her hands raw and stinging from tiny cuts, she stared at Isla's photograph. Her daughter's smile, fragile yet full of hope, stared back at her. Jasmine whispered to the picture as if Isla could hear across the distance. "We're one day closer, baby. One day closer to your chance." And in that whispered promise, the war inside the Bradford mansion deepened. For Meline, it became a desperate battle to destroy the one woman who dared to endure. For Jasmine, it became a fight not only for survival, but for respect, for dignity, for her daughter's life. What no one realized yet, not even James, was that the true battlefield wasn't the marble halls or the spotless dining room. The true battlefield was Meline's heart, and it was already beginning to crack. The storm rolled over Beverly Hills that night like a living thing. The sky cracked with thunder, and rain lashed against the tall windows of the Bradford mansion. Inside, the golden chandeliers glowed softly, but the house felt heavier than ever, its silence broken only by the muffled roar of the storm outside. Jasmine had finished her duties and was making her way back to her quarters, her steps slow from exhaustion. Her hands ached from polishing silver until they gleamed like mirrors, her knees still sore from scrubbing marble floors, but her heart remained steady. Every day survived was one day closer to Isla's surgery. She turned down the second-floor corridor, the wing that led to the master bedroom. Normally, she avoided lingering near that space. Meline's presence was like a frost that spread into the air, warning everyone to keep their distance. But tonight, something made Jasmine pause. From behind the closed door came a faint sound, a muffled, broken sob. She froze. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it. Meline Bradford did not cry. She cut, she commanded, she controlled. She wore cruelty like armor, and yet, there it was again, a soft, strangled sound heavy with pain. Jasmine's chest tightened. Against her better judgment, she stepped closer and nudged the already ajar door open. The sight inside stopped her cold. Meline sat slumped in a velvet chair by the wide window, her usually flawless hair falling loose over her shoulders. Her silk gown was wrinkled, her bare feet curled against the edge of the seat. Her hands covered her face, but even then Jasmine could see the way her shoulders shook, trembling under the weight of silent sobs. It was the most human, fragile version of Meline she had ever seen. Jasmine's instinct was to step back, to retreat quietly and pretend she hadn't seen. But before she could, Meline looked up, their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to still. Meline's face hardened instantly, as though the tears had betrayed her, and she had to reclaim her icy mask. She wiped at her cheeks quickly, her voice forced into firmness. "Who let you in here?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Jasmine said softly, bowing her head. "I was cleaning the hall and I heard. Are you all right?" The question hung in the air. No one had ever dared to ask Meline Bradford if she was all right. For a long moment, Meline said nothing. Her eyes darted to the window, to the storm raging outside before dropping back to her lap. Her voice, when it came, was low and trembling with bitterness. "You wouldn't understand, Jasmine. You could never understand what it feels like to be looked down on by everyone around you." The words struck Jasmine like an unexpected blow. She took a step inside, setting the cleaning cloth in her hand onto the small table by the door. Her voice was gentle, careful, but steady. "Sometimes I do understand, ma'am." Meline's head snapped toward her, suspicion flickering in her blue eyes. But behind the suspicion was something else, curiosity. For once, there was no venom in her gaze, only a desperate hunger to be heard. "James's family," Meline whispered, her voice cracking. "They've never accepted me. To them, I'll always be a poor girl who married for money, a trophy wife, a decoration. His friends don't respect me either. I thought, if I acted strong, if I was cold, if I kept everyone beneath me, then maybe they'd have to respect me, but the more I tried, the lonelier I felt, the emptier." Her words faltered, hanging like broken glass in the air. Jasmine's throat tightened. Against every memory of cruelty, every sting of insult, she felt something unexpected stir in her chest. Not anger, not hatred, but empathy. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. "I have a daughter. Her name is Isla. She's 8. She was born with a weak heart, and she's been sick all her life. Every day I work and endure. Not because I want to, but because I have to. I've begged doctors for mercy I couldn't afford. I know what it feels like to be seen as nothing, to be treated as if your worth is less than the air you breathe. And I know what it's like to hide behind strength so no one sees how broken you are." Silence filled the room. Meline stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a maid, not as a black woman to be scorned, but as a mother, as another soul carrying unbearable weight. The tears she had tried to hide slid down her cheeks again, softer this time. I didn't know." Jasmine lowered her gaze. "You weren't meant to. Most people don't ask." The storm outside rumbled, thunder echoing through the hills, but inside the bedroom, a strange quiet settled, fragile, uncertain, but real. Meline leaned back in her chair, her breath unsteady, while Jasmine stood in respectful silence. For the first time since she stepped into the Bradford mansion, Jasmine didn't feel like a servant speaking to her mistress. She felt like two women standing on opposite sides of the same wound, both scarred in different ways. When Jasmine finally stepped back toward the door, her heart was heavy but oddly steady. She had glimpsed something beneath the cruelty, something human, something broken. And though she could not have known it then, this fragile moment would become the crack through which light began to seep into the darkest heart of the mansion. The next morning, the mansion was quiet in a way that felt strange. No barked order, as from the halls. No impatient heels clicking against marble. Jasmine rose before dawn as always, her small room lit by a thin strip of gray light creeping through the blinds. She folded Isla's photograph gently, pressing her lips against it as if her daughter could feel the kiss across miles. One more day, baby. One more day closer. When she stepped into the kitchen, she expected the usual curt instructions, Margaret's icy gaze, Nancy's clipped replies. Instead, Margaret was already there waiting, a small white envelope in her hand. Her face was as unreadable as ever, but there was something in her eyes, hesitation, almost softness. "Madam says, open it now." She thrust the envelope forward, then turned away quickly, as though afraid of being caught showing too much humanity. Jasmine's hands trembled as she slit the envelope open. Inside were a few crisp bills and a folded note in elegant script. She read it once, twice, 3 times before she could believe it. "Take today off. Go see your daughter. This is for travel, and to buy her something she loves." The signature at the bottom was unmistakable, Meline Bradford. For a long moment, Jasmine stood frozen in the kitchen, her breath caught in her throat. She had braced herself for more cruelty, for another trap. Instead, she held proof of something she had never thought possible, kindness from the woman who had done everything to break her. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. There was no time to waste. She packed her small bag quickly, clutching Isla's photograph to her chest, and made her way out of the mansion. Ben, the chauffeur, was already waiting by the sleek black Mercedes. He gave her a brief nod, his usual smirk replaced by something that almost looked like respect. "I'll take you," he said simply. The ride through Los Angeles blurred by. Jasmine pressed her forehead against the glass, watching the city unfold in a rush of neon and rain-slicked streets. Her thoughts spun. Why now? Why her? Why would Meline, who had insulted, humiliated, even struck her, suddenly give her this chance? But when the hospital came into view, all questions dissolved into the ache of longing. She rushed down the sterile corridors, the faint smell of antiseptic heavy in the air, until she reached Isla's small room. The moment she opened the door, her daughter's frail face lit up with joy. "Mommy?" Isla's voice was weak, but it was filled with a brightness that pierced straight into Jasmine's heart. The little girl pushed herself up, arms open. Jasmine dropped her bag and rushed forward, pulling her daughter into her arms, holding her so tightly she thought she might never let go. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into Isla's thin hospital gown. "I missed you so much, baby. So much. I was scared you wouldn't come back," Isla whispered, her tiny fingers clutching her mother's sleeve. "I'll always come back," Jasmine promised, stroking her daughter's soft curls. "I will never leave you. Not ever." They sat together for hours, talking, laughing, holding hands. Jasmine gave her the small stuffed bear she bought from the hospital gift shop with the money in the envelope. Isla hugged it tight, eyes shining with wonder. For the first time in weeks, she looked less like a sick child and more like the little girl she truly was. When evening fell and the time came to leave, Jasmine's heart ached. She kissed Isla's forehead again and again, whispering promises that soon, very soon, her daughter would be well. On the drive back to the mansion, her thoughts returned to Meline. The woman who had been her tormentor had given her the most precious gift of all, a day in her daughter's arms, Confusion mixed with gratitude, a knot of emotions Jasmine didn't know how to untangle, but deep down, she sensed the truth. Something had shifted inside Meline. Back at the mansion, Jasmine returned to her duties quietly, not wanting to draw attention. But as she passed through the halls, she noticed subtle changes. Nancy gave her a faint nod instead of a smirk. Margaret's cold eyes softened for a heartbeat. Even Ben held the door for her without a word. And somewhere, behind her locked door, Meline Bradford sat alone, staring into her mirror, wondering when she had started to feel shame for the first time in years. For Jasmine, the day had been a miracle. For Meline, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous: change. The Bradford mansion hummed with preparation the following evening. Drivers lined the circular drive, sleek black cars gleaming beneath lanterns. Inside, the staff moved briskly, arranging gowns, fetching jewelry, polishing shoes that already shone. It was gala night, the kind of evening Meline Bradford lived for. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel would host the city's wealthiest, its chandeliers dripping with crystal light, its ballrooms echoing with the music of privilege. But for Jasmine, the night had begun with confusion. Hours earlier, Meline herself had appeared in the doorway of the servants' wing, her emerald eyes sharp, though not as cold as before. In her hands, she carried a garment bag of deep satin. "Tomorrow night," she said, her tone calm but carrying weight. "You're coming with me." Jasmine had blinked in disbelief. "Ma'am, I'm just the maid. I don't belong." "You belong," Meline cut in, her voice firmer. "You're the one who needs this more than anyone. Be ready." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Jasmine staring after her with her heart pounding in her chest. Now standing before a full-length mirror in a guest room she had never entered before, Jasmine barely recognized the woman staring back. The gown Meline had chosen was simple yet breathtaking, a deep navy blue that flowed gracefully around her slender frame. Her hair, usually pulled into a plain bun for work, was softly curled by the mansion's stylist. For the first time in her life, she looked less like a servant and more like a woman of quiet dignity. When she descended the grand staircase, the staff paused in their work. Margaret's eyes widened briefly before she hid her reaction behind her usual mask. Nancy's lips parted as if she might say something, then closed again. Even Ben, leaning near the door, gave a low whistle under his breath. Jasmine kept her eyes low, embarrassed by the attention, but inside, something fragile and warm flickered: respect. At the foot of the stairs stood Meline, radiant in an emerald gown that shimmered under the lights. She glanced at Jasmine, her lips curving in something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't disdain either. "You look beautiful," she said simply. Then she turned. "Let's go." The Beverly Wilshire was a palace of light that night. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden brilliance across marble floors. Waiters in crisp uniforms wove through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. The air was thick with perfume, laughter, and the murmurs of powerful men and women. Jasmine's breath caught as she followed Meline into the grand ballroom. She had never stood among such wealth, such effortless grace. Every instinct screamed that she didn't belong, that one wrong move would expose her. But beside her, Meline's presence steadied her, as strange as that felt. Soon they were surrounded by a circle of polished faces. Bankers, doctors, philanthropists, women dripping in diamonds, men in tailored tuxedos. Jasmine shifted nervously, ready to slip to the background, but Meline placed a hand lightly on her arm, keeping her in place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Meline said, her voice smooth, carrying easily over the chatter. All eyes turned to her. "This is Jasmine Carter, the strongest woman I've ever met, a mother who has endured more than you could imagine for the sake of her daughter." The words hit Jasmine like thunder. Her chest tightened. Surely Meline was mocking her. But no, there was no cruelty in her tone, no smirk on her lips, only sincerity. The crowd's attention swung to Jasmine. Dozens of eyes, curious and warm, studied her. A distinguished woman with silver hair stepped forward, her hand extended in kindness. "Hello, Jasmine. I'm Dr. Helen Foster, director of the Loving Hearts Foundation. Meline told us about you, your story. It touches me deeply. How can we help you and your little girl?" Jasmine's lips trembled. Her heart raced. For a moment, she couldn't speak at all. Then with a breath, she found her voice. "My daughter, Isla. She's 8. She was born with a weak heart. I've tried everything to save her, but I can't afford the surgery she needs. I just want her to live, to laugh, to run like other children." The ballroom fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down like a solemn prayer. Then Dr. Foster smiled softly, resolutely. "Our foundation will cover everything. The surgery, the hospital bills, the medication, the care after. Everything." Gasps rose from the circle. Jasmine's knees weakened. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. She had dreamed of this moment for years, prayed for it through nights of despair. Now, in the most unlikely of places, surrounded by the wealthy who never knew her name, she had received a miracle. She turned, her eyes finding Meline. The woman who had once humiliated her, struck her, called her unworthy, now saw. Tattooed with a gaze free of ice, a faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "I've done many wrong things, Jasmine," she said quietly, "but I hope this can be a start to making them right." Jasmine's voice broke as she whispered, "Ma'am, you've given me the most precious gift in the world. I don't know how to thank you." "No," Meline said softly, her eyes shining with something unfamiliar, remorse. "It's I who should thank you. Because of you, I finally see who I've become, and I don't want to be that woman anymore." In that ballroom, beneath the glitter of chandeliers, the two women, once enemies divided by cruelty and pain, stood side by side, united in compassion, bound by a child's fragile heartbeat and the hope of a new future. And somewhere across the city, in a small hospital room, Isla's future began to brighten without her even knowing it. The phone call came on a gray morning when the mansion still felt half asleep and the air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers. Jasmine was in the laundry room, folding a stack of linen sheets with quiet precision when Margaret appeared in the doorway. The older woman's expression was, as always, tight and unreadable, but her tone was different, softer somehow. "Telephone, for you," she said curtly, and handed Jasmine the receiver. Jasmine blinked in surprise. No one had ever called her at the mansion. Her heart leapt in her chest, fear and hope clashing inside her as she pressed the receiver to her ear. "Mrs. Carter?" The voice on the other end was warm, steady. "This is Dr. Helen Foster from the Loving Hearts Foundation. We've arranged everything. Isla's surgery has been scheduled for Monday morning. The hospital is preparing now, and the foundation will cover all expenses, surgery, medicine, aftercare, everything." For a moment, Jasmine couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt around her, the walls fading, the floor trembling beneath her feet. Her hand clutched the foe, knee so tightly her knuckles ached. Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Dr. Foster's tone was kind but firm. "Yes, my dear, your daughter will finally have her chance. She's going to be all right." Tears poured down Jasmine's face before she even realized she was crying. A sob broke free, raw and unguarded, filling the quiet laundry room. She pressed her free hand to her mouth, trying to contain the flood of emotion, but it was useless. Her knees gave way, and she sank into a chair, trembling. Through her blurred vision, she saw Margaret watching from the doorway. For the first time, the older woman's face softened. She stepped forward awkwardly, as though unsure if she had the right, and rested a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Good news?" she asked, her voice hushed. Jasmine nodded through tears, unable to form words. Margaret gave her shoulder a small squeeze, then stepped back quickly, hiding her own emotion behind her usual stiffness. But Jasmine caught it, a flicker of humanity in eyes that had once been cold. Word spread through the mansion quietly, like a ripple through still water. By lunchtime, Nancy, the cook who had once smirked at her pain, set a plate of warm food in front of Jasmine without a word and added softly, "Eat. You'll need strength for your girl." Ben, usually so aloof, offered her a ride to the hospital when the day came. Even Margaret, stern and unyielding, began to treat her with a new respect, her commands less sharp, her gaze less punishing. The mansion that had once been filled with cruelty now buzzed with something unfamiliar, compassion. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the estate in hues of orange and rose, James Bradford crossed the garden and found Jasmine polishing the brass handles on the glass doors. He paused, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. For a long moment he said nothing, only watched her with an expression caught between guilt and admiration. Finally his voice broke the silence. "I heard about your daughter." Jasmine stilled, her heart quickening. She looked up, unsure what to expect. "I'm glad she's getting the surgery," James continued, his tone sincere. "And I'm grateful for what you've brought to this house, more than you realize." Jasmine lowered her eyes, humility steadying her voice. "I've only done my job, sir." "No," James said quietly, shaking his head. "You've done more. You've endured. You've shown us what strength really looks like. And because of you, this house is changing." The words struck her deeply. For so long she had felt invisible, reduced to a shadow in the halls. Now, to be seen, not just as a maid, but as a person, a mother, a woman, was almost as overwhelming as the promise of Ila's healing. That night, alone in her small room, Jasmine held Ila's photograph to her chest, tears soaking the edges. "We're almost there, baby," she whispered into the silence. "You're going to live. You're going to laugh and play and run like you've always dreamed." Mommy kept her promise. Across the mansion, in her private chambers, Meline stood before her mirror, staring at her own reflection. The icy mask she had worn for so long looked brittle now, cracked at the edges. She thought of Jasmine's tears in the laundry room, of the staff's softened gazes, of James's quiet rebuke weeks earlier. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the mistress of the house. She felt like a woman, one who had lost her way. And though she didn't admit it aloud, Meline knew. It was Jasmine Carter, the maid who refused to break, who had opened her eyes. The mansion, once cursed, now carried something rare within its walls: hope. The morning sun fell gently across the Bradford estate, but the mansion itself felt different, lighter somehow, as though the heavy silence that had once hung in every corner had lifted. For weeks, Jasmine had moved through these halls with bowed head and quiet steps, but today there was a shift in the air, something unspoken that the staff felt as keenly as she did. She was in the garden, trimming roses with careful precision, when Margaret appeared. Her face was as stern as always, but her voice carried an unfamiliar weight. "Madam wants to see you, in her study, now." Jasmine's hands froze on the shears, a knot twisted in her stomach. In the past, being summoned by Meline had meant humiliation, a fresh wound to her dignity, but she had survived those days, endured them, and somehow, everything had changed. Still, her pulse raced as she wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the great oak doors of the study. Inside, Meline sat behind a wide desk, a ledger open before her, but her attention was fixed on Jasmine the moment she entered. There was no silk gown today, no dramatic makeup. She wore a simple cream blouse, her golden hair loose around her shoulders, her blue eyes startlingly clear. "Sit down, Jasmine," she said. The tone was firm, but not sharp, almost respectful. Jasmine hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair opposite, her hands folded in her lap, steady despite her racing heart. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Meline studied her, as if weighing something heavy inside herself. Then she spoke, her voice softer than Jasmine had ever heard. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened in this house, about the way I've treated you." She paused, her eyes flickering with something raw, remorse. I made a terrible mistake, and I see now that you've brought more good into this home than I ever have." Jasmine's eyes widened. She wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. Meline leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. "Starting today, I want you to manage the entire household staff. Margaret will step down. You'll oversee operations, schedules, duties, order. This isn't just a promotion, Jasmine. It's the respect you've earned." The words struck Jasmine like a thunderclap. She sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had imagined many outcomes when she first walked through the mansion gates. Failure, humiliation, maybe even being cast out like the maids before her. But never this, never recognition, never honor. "Ma'am," she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "You've already said it," Meline replied quietly. "Every day you refused to break, every time you endured, you showed me what strength really is. And I trust you to lead this house with the dignity I failed to." The door creaked open, and James Bradford stepped in. His tall frame filled the doorway, his usual stoic expression softened by something almost tender. He looked from Meline to Jasmine, then stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the maid who had become far more than just an employee. "I agree," he said, his voice steady. "Jasmine, you've done more for this family than you realize. You've helped us restore something we didn't even know was lost. Peace, humanity. For that, you have my deepest gratitude." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his gaze warm with sincerity. "Thank you." Tears slid down Jasmine's cheeks, unbidden, unstoppable. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. "I should be the one thanking you. You saved my daughter. You gave her a chance at life. I can never repay that." Meline rose from her chair and stepped around the desk. For once, there was no distance between mistress and maid, no sharpness, no cruelty. Only a woman who had seen her own reflection in someone else's strength. She reached into a drawer, pulled out a small brass key, and pressed it into Jasmine's palm. "This is for the manager's apartment here on the estate. It's yours now. It has everything you'll need. You've earned comfort, and when Isla comes home from the hospital, she'll have a place here with you." Jasmine stared at the key in her hand, her tears blurring the tiny object into a golden shimmer. Her throat closed around the words she longed to say, but when she finally found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you both. I never believed this day would come." In that study, beneath the gaze of the people who had once seemed unreachable, Jasmine Carter felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not just survival, not just endurance, but dignity. The Bradford mansion, once a place of cruelty and despair, had given her more than she could have imagined. Respect, a home, a future for her daughter. And as she walked out of that room, clutching the key to her new life, she knew the curse of the mansion had finally been broken. The evening air inside the Bradford mansion was heavy with stillness. For the first time since Jasmine had arrived, there was no storm of insults, no echo of sharp commands. The halls were quiet, and yet Jasmine felt a strange pull as Margaret appeared once more at her door. "Madam wants to see you," the older woman said, her tone softer than usual. "In her sitting room, alone." Jasmine set aside the laundry she had been folding and nodded. Her heart beat faster as she walked down the grand hallway, past paintings framed in gold, past crystal vases glowing in the dim light. Each step carried the weight of uncertainty. A promotion was one thing, a key to an apartment was another. But to be summoned privately by Meline Bradford, it was something else entirely. When she entered, the sight that met her was not what she expected. Meline was not dressed in her usual silks. She wore a simple cardigan, her golden hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She sat by the window, staring out at the garden where night shadows blurred the roses into shapes of gray. For once, she looked less like a queen and more like a woman. "Sit," she said quietly, gesturing to the chair across from her. Jasmine obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. The silence stretched long, filled only by the distant hum of Los Angeles traffic. Finally, Meline spoke. "I imagine you've wondered why I've been the way I've been." Her voice was low, almost hesitant. Cold, cruel, unforgiving. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "It's easy to call me heartless. And maybe I have been, but it wasn't always that way." Jasmine lifted her eyes, listening. Meline's gaze stayed fixed on the window, as though the past played itself out in the darkness beyond. "I wasn't born into this world of chandeliers and silk gowns. I came from nothing. My mother scrubbed floors until her fingers bled just to keep food on the table. And when she couldn't work, I did. I was 14 when I became a maid in a wealthy family's home. I thought it was a blessing at the time, a chance to rise above. But it wasn't. It was a prison. Her hands tightened in her lap. They humiliated me, laughed at my clothes, slapped me when I was too slow, called me names that still echo in my head when I try to sleep. I told myself I'd never be powerless again, that I would build walls so high no one could ever wound me. Her voice faltered, and I did, but those walls turned me into the very thing I swore I'd never become. Jasmine's breath caught. She had never expected this confession, never imagined that the venom she endured had once been inflicted upon the very woman who had wielded it against her. Meline finally turned, her blue eyes glistening with unshed tears. When I looked at you, Jasmine, I saw what I used to be, weak, vulnerable, an easy target, and instead of protecting you, I punished you. I hated you for reminding me of the girl I once was. That was my sin. The words cut deep, not in cruelty but in raw honesty. Jasmine sat very still, her heart trembling in her chest. For a long moment she didn't know what to say. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice quiet but steady. You're wrong about one thing, ma'am. Weakness. I'm not weak. And you weren't either. Not then. You survived. And survival. That's strength. Meline blinked, her lips parting as though the idea had never occurred to her. Slowly, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Jasmine's voice softened, carrying the weight of her truth. I didn't endure all of this because I wanted to. I endured because of my daughter. Because when you love someone that much, there's nothing you won't suffer for them. Maybe you built walls out of pain. I built mine out of love. That's the only difference. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with understanding too deep for words. Meline finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging. You've done what no one else ever has, Jasmine. You didn't just survive me. You showed me myself. And for that, her voice broke. For that, I owe you everything. For the first time, Jasmine saw not the mistress of the mansion, not the cruel young wife everyone whispered about, but a woman scarred by her own history, broken, yes, but still human. And in that moment, something shifted irreversibly between them. Meline reached across the space between them and took Jasmine's hand gently in hers. I promise you this, she whispered. Your daughter will never want for anything again, not while I live. Jasmine's tears slipped free. She squeezed Meline's hand, her voice breaking. Then maybe we can both stop running from our pasts. The storm that had haunted the Bradford mansion for months had begun to settle. The battle between cruelty and endurance was giving way to something stronger, something no one in that house had ever expected, compassion. And though neither woman could see it yet, this fragile bond between them would lead to the most shocking act of redemption the mansion had ever witnessed. The mansion was alive with sunlight that morning, spilling through the tall windows in golden streams, softening the edges of the cold white marble. For months, those same beams had felt like a cruel spotlight, exposing Jasmine's humiliation, marking her as a target under Meline's icy blue gaze. But today the light felt decent, different, warmer, almost as if the house itself was ready for something new. Jasmine stood in the foyer, dressed not in her old maid's uniform, but in a simple navy dress Meline had chosen for her. Her hair was tied neatly, her hands folded nervously in front of her. The staff gathered quietly in the background, Margaret, Nancy, Ben, all waiting with a mix of curiosity and awe. Even James Bradford stood near the grand staircase, his sharp eyes steady on his wife as though he too was bracing for whatever was about to unfold. Meline descended the stairs with the grace of a queen, but her presence was no longer cloaked in cruelty. There was no smirk, no sharpness in her stride. Instead, her face carried something that few had ever seen there before, resolve, softened by humility. She reached the bottom step and turned toward the gathered staff, her gaze sweeping over them before resting on Jasmine. Most of you know the stories, she began, her voice steady, carrying easily through the hall, the whispers, that no maid ever lasted here, that this house chewed people up and spat them out. For a long time, I told myself that was just the way things were, that fear and discipline were the only ways to command respect, but I was wrong. The staff shifted, their eyes widening. Never before had Meline spoken like this. She turned fully toward Jasmine now, her expression open, unguarded. This woman, Jasmine Carter, came here like so many before her. I tried to break her. I humiliated her, insulted her, hurt her, but she did not bend. She did not cry out. She endured. And in that endurance, she showed me something I had never seen before, true strength. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes did not waver. Meline's voice softened, almost breaking. You didn't just survive me, Jasmine. You saved me. You forced me to see what I had become and gave me the chance to change. For that, I can never repay you, but I will try." She glanced at James, who nodded slowly, then lifted a thick folder from the side table and placed it in Jasmine's hands. Jasmine frowned, confused as she opened it. Inside were papers, documents with hospital seals, signatures, and a final bold statement across the top. Paid in full. Her hands trembled. Her eyes raced over the words. Every hospital bill, every surgery cost, every treatment Isla would ever need. Covered. Her knees nearly gave way. She clutched the folder to her chest, tears flooding her vision. I don't... Meline stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You no longer have to choose between survival and your daughter's life. From this day forward, Isla has everything she needs. A chance at life, at happiness. She'll never face the world alone. Because neither will you." Jasmine sobbed openly now, her body shaking with the weight of relief, of gratitude, of disbelief. Around them, the staff watched with stunned faces. Margaret's stern eyes glistened. Nancy pressed a hand to her mouth. Even Ben blinked quickly, his usual smirk gone. James spoke at last, his voice firm but warm. "Jasmine, you've brought dignity back into this house. You've shown us that respect isn't earned by fear, but by compassion. For that, you'll always have a place here, not as a maid, not as staff, but as part of this family." The words hit Jasmine like a second wave. She pressed her face into her hands, overwhelmed by the enormity of what was unfolding. For months, she had whispered the same promise every night. 3 months, just 3 months. And now standing in the heart of the mansion that had once been her prison, she realized she had not just lasted, she had triumphed. Meline lifted her chin, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. "The curse of this house is broken," she said quietly, though everyone heard, "because one woman refused to break." The staff, one by one, bowed their heads toward Jasmine, not as a servant, not as someone beneath them, but as a leader, as a survivor, as a woman who had endured the impossible and changed everything. Jasmine clutched the folder to her chest, her tears falling freely now. She thought of Isla, her daughter's frail smile, her little voice saying, "Mommy, don't leave me." She thought of every insult, every slap, every humiliation she had endured, and then she thought of the miracle that awaited her child. Her voice was broken but strong as she whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for giving my little girl a future." Meline squeezed her hand, her own voice trembling. "No, Jasmine. Thank you for giving me a soul again." And in that moment, beneath the vaulted ceilings and glittering chandeliers, the Bradford mansion was no longer a place of cruelty. It became something new, a place of redemption, a place of healing, a place where, for the first time, love had finally taken root.